Have you ever felt like you're just drowning in information?
Oh, absolutely.
Every single day, right? We get bombarded with articles, reports, data. It's coming from everywhere,
Yeah, it feels impossible sometimes to keep up,
let alone, really master complex stuff quickly.
which is such a vital skill, isn't it? Not just for life, but thinking about big things like the SAT.
Exactly.
Yes.
Moving beyond just remembering facts to really understanding them.
And being able to boil down complex ideas, that's paramount today.
That's precisely it. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're tackling a really practical subject, the SAT reading test.
Ah, yes. A big one for many people.
We've got our hands on Chapter 9 of the official SAT study guide. It's packed with sample questions and honestly some invaluable insights into how this whole section works.
It's a great resource. The official guide is definitely the place to start.
So our goal today is to unpack this chapter. We want to reveal the core skills you need, the strategies that work, and the types of questions you'll actually face.
We'll try to distill those key takeaways.
Yeah, and make some of the critical terms really plain, highlight the official tips that can genuinely help you succeed.
Think of this as a shortcut, maybe. A way to get straight to what the SAT reading test demands.
Exactly. And how to approach it feeling, confident.
All right, let's do it. Where do we start?
Okay, let's jump right in. The first thing that just leaps out from the guide is the structure, the overall structure of this reading section.
Right. It's not just random passages thrown together.
No, there's a definite method here.
Mm-hmm. And the guide is super clear about the parameters. You're looking at 65 minutes
Okay.
to answer 52 questions.
Wow. Okay, so that immediately tells you something.
It screams pace. Pace is crucial. You really don't have time to linger too long on any one question.
Makes sense. And the passages themselves, they seem quite varied.
They are. The guide says you'll get 4 single passages and 1 set of paired passages.
Paired passages. Okay, that adds another layer.
It does. And the content really spans a wide spectrum. Well, you'll definitely see U.S. and world literature. Think classic novels, maybe short stories, sometimes even historical speeches that have literary quality.
Okay, literature. Got it.
Then there's history and social studies. This is where you might see passages discussing things like an idea-driven economy, for example.
Right, I saw that one.
Or even like a passage based on a historical document about impeachment proceedings.
So real-world complex arguments.
Exactly. Testing if you can grasp arguments from significant historical or social contexts. And finally, there's science.
Science passages, too.
Yep. Things like studies on loggerhead turtles and their navigation. Or even studies looking into crow intelligence. It's designed to see if you can read and comprehend across different academic fields.
And some of these aren't just text, right? The guide mentions graphics.
That's a key point, yes. 1 history social studies passage and 1 science passage will come with some kind of informational graphic.
Like a table or a chart.
Exactly. Like the sample mentioned that bar graph about most congested cities in 2011. You have to integrate that visual data with the text.
Okay, so reading text and reading data.
It's about synthesizing information from different formats, which is a really important skill today, and under time pressure, no less.
Tell me about the difficulty. Are they all super hard?
Not necessarily all the same. The guide mentions text complexity ranging from, say, grades 9-10 level.
Okay, so maybe a bit more straightforward.
Up to what they call post-secondary entry level, college level reading.
Ah, okay. So you need to be adaptable.
Definitely. You'll encounter different writing styles, different levels of conceptual difficulty. You need to shift gears depending on the passage.
So given all that structure, the timing, the different types of passages,
Yeah.
how does the guide help us, actually tackle the questions? What are the core skills they're testing?
That's the really useful part. The guide breaks it down. It categorizes the underlying skills being tested.
Which helps you understand why you're doing what you're doing, not just what.
Precisely. It builds a framework for how to read critically for the test.
Okay, so let's get into those categories. The first one is information and ideas. Sounds pretty foundational.
It is. As the name suggests, it's all about understanding what the passage says directly.
Okay, the explicit stuff.
Right, but also what it implies indirectly.
Ah, the inferences.
Yeah.
Making logical leaps based on the text.
Exactly. Reading critically for comprehension, identifying that stated info, but also drawing those logical conclusions, getting to the core message, even if it's not spelled out word for word.
So it's not just about remembering details.
No, it's deeper. The SAT wants to see what you can deduce from the text, not just recall.
And the guide gives examples, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like for reading comprehension and inference.
Mm-hmm. There's a sample question about researchers at the Martin Prosperity Institute. It asks you to infer an assumption they make about remote work versus commuting.
And the answer wasn't directly stated.
No. The explanation shows the correct answer is that they assume shorter commutes mean more productive time for workers. It's implied by how they analyze the data, but not explicitly written down.
Okay, I see. That's subtle. What else falls under information and ideas?
A really critical one, word and context.
Ah, vocabulary questions.
Well, yes and no. It's not just about knowing a dictionary definition. It's about figuring out the precise meaning of a word or phrase as the author uses it in that specific passage.
So the context is everything.
Absolutely. And the insight here isn't just looking at the surrounding words, it's recognizing the SAT is testing your linguistic agility. Can you pivot from a common meaning to a very specific context-driven one?
So it's less about how many words you know and more about how well you reason with the words you're given.
Exactly. It's contextual reasoning power.
The guide had some good examples here, like the word intense.
Right. In that passage about jobs and innovation clustering, intense didn't just mean strong. It specifically meant the concentration or focus of those elements in certain areas.
Okay, and another one, channeled.
Yeah, in the context of legal proceedings, it meant a very narrow, constrained path or process, not just directed in a general sense.
And tracked for the turtles.
Meant followed or monitored their migration path, not like a running track.
Gotcha.
And the guide makes a really important point. Wrong answers often use other common meanings of the word.
The distractors.
Precisely. They look plausible if you don't check back carefully against how the word is actually functioning in that sentence, in that paragraph. You always have to verify with the text.
Okay, always go back to the text. What else? Relationships.
Yes, identifying relationships.
Yeah.
This could be between people mentioned, different ideas, or even different pieces of research presented in the passage.
Like the turtle researchers. Putnam and Lohmann.
Exactly. The question asks you to characterize their relationship. The answer shows Putnam's field research confirmed Lohmann's earlier lab findings about turtles using magnetic fields. It shows how science builds on previous work.
So understanding how ideas connect or how research progresses.
Right, tracing that development. And maybe the most direct test of this kind of textual grounding is the best evidence questions.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing these. They're kind of clever.
They are. They come in pairs.
Right. The first question asks you something about the passage.
Like, what claim does the author make? Or what does this character feel?
And then the second question asks you to pinpoint the exact lines in the passage that best support your answer to the first one.
It's like a built-in fact checker for your reasoning.
Yeah. The example about Alexander Hamilton's view on political parties, then bam, the next question is, okay, prove it. Which lines show that?
It directly tests your ability to find textual evidence. You can't just rely on a general feeling. You have to point to the proof.
No guessing allowed, basically.
Well, you can guess, but it forces you to justify it. Here's a pro tip, though. Sometimes looking at the line references offered as answers in the second question can actually help you narrow down the possibilities for the first question. Reading those specific lines might clarify the main point or claim being asked about.
Oh, that's smart. Use the evidence question to help answer the main question.
It can work. It turns the pair into a way to double-check your thinking, not just prove it after the fact.
Okay, that's a great tip. Let's move on to the next big skill category, rhetoric. This sounds more complex.
It shifts the focus a bit. It's not just about what the passage says, but how it says it, and crucially, why.
The author's craft. Their choices.
Exactly. If you think bigger picture, rhetoric is about purpose, style, how an author builds an argument, how they evoke emotion. It pushes you to think critically about the assumptions and techniques behind the words.
So you're analyzing the technique itself.
You are. The sort of hidden layer here is that every choice an author makes, word choice, sentence structure, overall organization, is usually intentional. They're trying to achieve a specific effect.
Okay, so what kinds of questions test this? Understanding the speaker's perspective seems key.
Definitely. Like that sample question about Barbara Jordan's speech on impeachment, it asks for her perspective.
And the answer wasn't just she's talking about impeachment.
No, the correct answer identified her as sort of an idealist, setting forth constitutional principles. She has a clear stance, a viewpoint that shapes how she presents the information.
Got it. And what about analyzing specific words or phrases for their effect?
Also very common. There's that powerful example from Jordan's speech. Again, the phrase diminution, subversion, destruction.
Right.
The question asks about the rhetorical effect. The explanation shows how those words build on each other, indicating a rising intensity, a growing threat to the Constitution. It's about the impact of that specific word choice.
Okay, the weight of the words.
Mm-hmm. Or another example in the science passage, asking why the author mentions reed warblers and sparrows.
Why did they mention them?
It wasn't random. It was to provide examples of other species that share the loggerhead turtle's magnetic navigation abilities. It supports the broader point the author is making about animal navigation, specific examples serving a larger rhetorical purpose.
That makes sense, using details strategically. I remember another one from that literary passage from Ethan Frome. The phrase, her light step flying to keep time with his long stride. Analyzing that.
Right. And the analysis shows that specific description isn't just about how they're walking. It conveys their shared excitement, their joy, their connection in that moment. It links the physical action to their emotional state.
Revealing character and mood through description. Very literary.
Indeed. This category also looks at the overall text structure and purpose.
That's how the whole thing is put together.
Yeah, like a question about the overall structure of that Ethan Frome passage, identifying its focus on tracking a character's changing emotions over the course of the scene.
Yeah.
It shows a narrative arc.
Not just a static snapshot.
Exactly. Or for paired passages, you might get a question about the purpose of an introductory section. Like in the Crow intelligence passages, asking about the first two paragraphs discussing Morgan's canon.
What was the purpose of that?
It was to provide historical context, to set up why the researchers' findings described later are considered significant or unique against that backdrop. Context is key.
Okay. And finally, under rhetoric.
The relationship between specific parts and the whole passage. How do details contribute to the overall meaning or tone?
Like the sunset description.
Perfect example. Why does the author describe the sunset, the clouds, the shadows in such detail? The explanation shows it's to emphasize how sharp, how acute the character's sensations are at that moment. The natural beauty enhances their emotional experience.
So every detail potentially serves a purpose.
That's the assumption you should work with when analyzing rhetoric. Assume intentionality.
Okay, that's a lot under rhetoric. This brings us to the third main skill, synthesis. This sounds like where you really have to pull everything together.
It is, especially when you've got multiple sources, like text in a graphic or two different passages.
Like those paired passages again.
Right. Synthesis tests your ability to connect the dots, to build a cohesive understanding from different pieces of information. It's crucial in our world today, right? Information rarely lives in isolation.
True. You always have to compare sources or check data against claims.
Exactly. The sort of hidden lesson here is that understanding connections is key to real comprehension.
Okay, so first up, under synthesis. Interpreting graphical data. I feel like these can trip people up.
They definitely can if you're not careful. The example used is that bar graph about yearly hours of delay per automobile commuter.
Right, the congested cities one.
The question asks you to compare two cities based on the graph. It requires you to carefully read the bar heights for the specific cities mentioned. A quick glance isn't enough.
So you really have to read the graph itself.
Yes. The guide stresses this. Analyze the title, understand what the axes represent, check the labels, pay attention to the units and the increments. Overlooking any of those details can lead you straight to a wrong answer.
Good advice. Treat the graphic like its own mini text.
Exactly. Read it closely.
Okay, and then the other big synthesis challenge. Those paired passages. Combining info from two related texts.
Right. The ultimate synthesis test on the reading section, probably. The guide uses the Crow intelligence passages as a prime example.
How so?
Well, one question might ask how the crows described in Passage 1 and Passage 2 are similar. What trait do they share?
And the answer would require pulling info from both.
Yes. The correct answer demonstrated that both passages showed crows modifying their behavior based on changes in their environment. You have to see that common thread across both texts.
Okay, and differences too.
Absolutely. Another question highlights the difference in the experiments. It forces you to notice that the researchers in Passage 2 actually presented the crows with a specific problem to solve in a controlled lab setting.
Whereas Passage 1 might have been more observational.
Potentially, or focused on a different aspect. The key is discerning that difference in methodology or focus based on careful reading of both passages.
And sometimes it gets even more complex, right? Like comparing conclusions.
A really sophisticated synthesis question might ask if the conclusion reached in passage 2 is consistent with a principle discussed in passage 1, like Morgan's canner.
Wow, okay. So you have to understand the principle from passage 1 and the findings from passage 2 and evaluate the relationship between them.
Precisely. And this is where one of the guide's key tips for paired passages comes in really handy.
Which is?
Understand each passage individually first. Figure out the main point, the key evidence, the tone of passage 1. Then do the same for passage 2. Only then should you start trying to find the connections, the contrasts, the points of agreement or disagreement.
Don't jump to comparing too soon.
Exactly. Get clear on each voice, each argument, before you try to synthesize them. Rushing that step leads to confusion.
That makes a ton of sense. Okay, so we've covered the main skills. Information and ideas, rhetoric, synthesis. Beyond these big categories, the guide sprinkles in practical advice, right, in those little boxes.
Yeah, the practice at remember boxes, they're gold.
What stands out to you from those? What should listeners really take away?
Well, the constant reminder to practice at satpractice.org isn't just, an ad. It's core strategy.
Because practice helps.
Yes, but more specifically, because the explanations provided there for both correct and incorrect answers are incredibly detailed.
Learning from mistakes.
Exactly. They don't just tell you the answer is B, they explain why B is right, and just as importantly, why A, C, and D are wrong, often linking back to specific reasoning errors you might have made. That feedback is invaluable for real improvement.
That's huge. Okay, so use the official practice resources and study the explanations. What other key tips emerge?
Always read the introductory blurbs before the passages.
The little italicized bit.
Yeah, especially for paired passages or, maybe older historical texts. That intro often gives crucial context about the author, the source, the time period, or the general topic. It sets the stage. Don't skip it.
Good one. Okay, read the intro. What else?
For those word in context questions, remember, always, always use the surrounding sentences to lock down the meaning in that specific context. Don't just rely on the first definition that pops into your head.
Because common meanings are often traps.
They are often the distractors. Context rules.
Okay, and for the graphics?
Analyze them thoroughly. Title, axes, labels, units. Draw conclusions based only on what the data actually shows. Don't make assumptions beyond the data presented.
Read the graphic carefully. Got it.
And always be thinking about the author's purpose. Ask yourself, why did the author write this? What are they trying to achieve? Why these words? Why this structure?
Understanding the why behind the text.
It's critical, especially for rhetoric questions, but it helps across the board.
And supporting answers.
Be ready to support every answer, especially for those best evidence pairs, but really for all of them. You should ideally be able to point back to specific lines or ideas in the text that justify your choice. If you can't find the evidence.
Reconsider the answer.
Exactly. It might just be a hunch, and hunches can be wrong.
Okay. And one last big one for paired passages.
Clearly distinguish between the sources. Keep the ideas from passage 1 separate from passage 2 in your mind before you start comparing or synthesizing. Use scratch paper, if needed, to jot down main points for each. Don't let them blur together.
Understand them separately first. Great advice. Okay, so, wow, we've really covered a lot from just one chapter.
It's a dense chapter.
It really is. We've taken this deep dive into Chapter 9 of the official SAT study guide. We've hit the structure of the reading test, the different passage types, literature, history, science.
Yeah, the graphics.
Right, the graphics. And most importantly, those core skills. Information and ideas, rhetoric, and synthesis. And we walked through tons of specific examples. The commuting data, the impeachment speech, the loggerhead turtles, Ethan Frome, the crows, all illustrating how these skills actually play out with different kinds of texts and questions.
And we highlighted those practical tips straight from the guide itself. We tried to cover the whole chapter, really.
I think we did. And what this deep dive really reveals, I think, is that success on the SAT reading test isn't just about how fast you can read.
Not at all. It's much more about active engagement with the text.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, and recognizing the author's strategic choices. It's a pretty comprehensive test of your analytical literacy.
And, the skills you build for this test, analyzing complex arguments, understanding subtle meanings, synthesizing information from different places, these are genuinely universal skills.
Absolutely. They serve you well beyond test day, in college, in work, just in navigating the world.
Totally. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As you go about your day, maybe start thinking about how you can apply this kind of reading, this deep critical analysis. Apply it to the news you read, the articles you see, the information you encounter online.
Yeah, see the world as kind of one big reading passage.
Maybe not quite, but you get the idea. How can you dig deeper? The world is full of texts to analyze, and these skills are like your superpower for understanding them better.
Well said.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the SAT Reading Test, Chapter 9. We hope it was helpful.
Thanks for tuning in.
Keep learning, keep questioning, keep reading critically, and we'll see you next time.